This chapter is the heart of the book, the point where everything you have heard so far comes together and turns into movement. Because knowing is not enough anymore, and wishing is not enough anymore. This book was never about motivation that fades by morning. It was about realignment. From the first chapter, the message has been simple but demanding. Your life does not change when the calendar changes, it changes when you do. Now, standing at the edge of 2026, this chapter exists to remind you that you are not behind, you are not broken, and you are not out of time. You are simply being invited to reset, restart, and refocus with intention. CTR 1. This book begins at the quietest, but most powerful point of change. The moment you stop running from yourself and choose to look honestly at where you are. Not where you wish you were. Not where you pretend to be, but where you actually stand right now in your life. This is not a moment of judgment, and it is not a moment of regret. It is a moment of truth, because truth is the only solid ground on which real transformation can be built. For too long, you may have told yourself that time will fix things, that motivation will eventually arrive, or that one lucky break will suddenly change everything. But deep down you already know that nothing truly changes until you decide to change. This chapter exists to slow you down, to pull you out of autopilot, and to remind you that awareness is the beginning of every meaningful reset. Before habits can shift, before goals can be reached, and before direction can be found, you must first see your life clearly, without excuses and without denial. Awareness is not comfortable, because it asks you to notice patterns you have ignored, reactions you have justified, and choices you have repeated without thinking. It asks you to admit how often you have chosen comfort over growth, distraction over focus, and familiarity over progress. But awareness is also freeing, because once you see the pattern, you are no longer trapped inside it. You begin to understand that your current results are not random. They are the outcome of daily decisions, emotional responses, and mental habits that have been quietly shaping your direction for years. This realization is not meant to make you feel small. It is meant to make you powerful. When you recognize that your life is the result of patterns, you also recognize that new patterns can be created. This chapter invites you to take responsibility for your inner world, because your thoughts, emotions, and beliefs are the lens through which you experience everything. If your lens is distorted by fear, doubt, or resentment, even good opportunities will look like threats. Awareness helps you clean that lens. It teaches you to pause before reacting, to observe your emotions instead of being controlled by them, and to question the stories you tell yourself when things do not go your way. You begin to see how often your mind pulls you into the past through regret, or pushes you into the future through anxiety, while the present moment, the only place where change can happen, gets ignored. This chapter is about reclaiming that present moment. It reminds you that you cannot heal what you refuse to acknowledge, and you cannot improve what you are unwilling to examine. Awareness is not about blaming yourself for where you are. It is about understanding yourself well enough to move forward with clarity. When you become aware, you stop lying to yourself about what is costing you your peace, your focus, and your potential. You notice how certain environments drain you, how certain habits keep you stuck, and how certain thoughts repeat like background noise, shaping your confidence without your permission. This awareness does not demand immediate perfection. It asks for honesty. It asks you to admit when you are tired of starting over, when you are afraid of failing again, and when you have outgrown the version of yourself that once felt safe. This chapter sets the foundation for the entire book by teaching you that growth begins with observation, not force. You do not need to fight yourself into change. You need to understand yourself into it. As you listen to this chapter, imagine turning the lights on in a dark room. The furniture was always there, but now you can see where to step and where not to. Awareness works the same way in your life. It illuminates your strengths, your weaknesses, and your blind spots, so you can move forward with intention instead of impulse. This is where your reset truly begins, not with a dramatic declaration, but with a quiet decision to pay attention. Because once you are aware, you can no longer pretend you do not know what needs to change. And that awareness, though uncomfortable at first, becomes the most powerful ally you will ever have on your journey forward. Awareness opens your eyes, but understanding patterns gives you direction, and this chapter exists to help you see that your life is not shaped by luck, coincidence, or fate, but by repeated thoughts, repeated emotions, and repeated behaviors that quietly run in the background of your days. Every outcome you experience has a history, and that history is written in the small choices you make when no one is watching. The reactions you default to under pressure, and the habits you repeat even when they no longer serve you. Patterns are powerful because they feel familiar, and familiarity often disguises itself as comfort, even when it is keeping you stuck. You may notice that the same problems keep appearing in different forms, similar conflicts, similar disappointments, similar self-doubt, and this chapter asks you to stop asking, "Why does this keep happening to me?" and start asking, "What am I repeating?" When you ask that question honestly, you begin to see that patterns are not punishments, they are messages. They are signals pointing to areas of your life that require attention, adjustment, and growth. This chapter teaches you that once a pattern becomes visible, it loses its power to control you unconsciously. You start noticing how quickly you give up when progress feels slow, how easily you seek distraction when discomfort arises, or how often you sabotage momentum the moment things begin to improve. These patterns are not flaws in your character. They are learned responses, often formed in moments when you were simply trying to protect yourself, but protection that once helped you survive may now be preventing you from thriving. Understanding this creates compassion instead of shame, and compassion makes change sustainable. This chapter also explores how mental patterns shape emotional reactions. The way you interpret a situation determines how you feel about it, and how you feel determines how you act. If your mind is trained to expect failure, rejection, or disappointment, your body will respond with tension, hesitation, and fear, even when opportunity is in front of you. By recognizing this loop, you gain the ability to interrupt it. You learn that you are not your first thought, not your first emotion, and not your automatic reaction. You are the awareness that can choose what happens next. Patterns also exist in how you speak to yourself. The inner dialogue you repeat daily becomes the blueprint for your confidence and self-worth. If that dialogue is critical, impatient, or dismissive, your external world will eventually reflect that tone. This chapter invites you to listen closely to the words you use internally, because they are shaping your limits and possibilities more than you realize. Understanding patterns requires honesty, but it also requires patience. These patterns did not form overnight, and they will not dissolve instantly. Change begins when you stop trying to fix everything at once and start noticing one pattern at a time. Maybe it is the pattern of procrastination that appears when tasks feel overwhelming, or the pattern of overthinking that appears when decisions matter, or the pattern of seeking validation that appears when confidence feels shaky. Each pattern you recognize is a doorway to change, because recognition creates choice. This chapter emphasizes that you cannot outwork a pattern you do not understand, and you cannot heal a cycle you refuse to acknowledge. By studying your patterns instead of judging them, you turn your life into a classroom rather than a courtroom. Every reaction becomes data, every setback becomes information, and every repetition becomes an opportunity to respond differently next time. Over time, these small shifts compound, and new patterns begin to form, patterns of patience instead of panic, consistency instead of intensity, and self-trust instead of self-doubt. This chapter reinforces the idea that you are not broken, you are patterned, and patterns can be rewritten. When you understand how your mind, emotions, and behaviors work together, you stop feeling confused by your own actions and start feeling empowered to change them. This is where responsibility becomes possible, because once you see the pattern clearly, you can no longer pretend you have no choice. Understanding patterns does not limit your freedom. It expands it. It gives you the ability to respond instead of react, to choose instead of repeat, and to move forward with intention instead of habit. And as this chapter comes to a close, it leaves you with one powerful truth to carry forward. The moment you recognize a pattern is the moment you are no longer its prisoner, but its observer. And from that position, real change becomes not only possible, but inevitable. Acceptance is where the inner struggle finally begins to soften, not because life suddenly becomes easier, but because you stop wasting energy fighting what already exists. This chapter is about the courage it takes to say, "This is where I am," without adding shame, excuses, or self-punishment to the truth. Many people misunderstand acceptance and confuse it with giving up, but acceptance is not surrendering your dreams, it is surrendering the resistance that keeps you stuck. When you argue with reality, you lose every time, because reality does not need your agreement to remain true. Acceptance does not ask you to like your situation, it asks you to see it clearly enough to change it effectively. This chapter invites you to notice how much of your exhaustion comes not from your circumstances, but from your refusal to accept them. You replay the past, wishing you had chosen differently, spoken sooner, tried harder, or known better, but that mental replay does not rewrite history. It only drains the present. Acceptance gently closes the door on "what if," so you can fully step into "what now." When you accept where you are, you stop measuring yourself against imaginary timelines and begin working with the time and energy you actually have. This chapter explains that acceptance is an act of honesty with yourself, not a verdict on your worth. You are allowed to accept that you are tired and still desire growth. You are allowed to accept that you made mistakes and still believe in your potential. Acceptance creates emotional stability because it removes the internal war between who you are and who you think you should be. That war, left unresolved, becomes anxiety, frustration, and chronic self-doubt. By accepting your current position, you create a calm foundation from which intentional action can rise. This chapter also explores how acceptance applies to emotions. Too often, people try to suppress fear, sadness, or disappointment, believing that strong emotions are weaknesses, but emotions do not disappear when ignored, they intensify. Acceptance teaches you to let emotions pass through without letting them take control. When you accept an emotion, you observe it instead of obeying it, and in that observation, its power begins to fade. This chapter reminds you that growth does not require emotional perfection, it requires emotional awareness. Acceptance allows you to feel without collapsing and to reflect without spiraling. It also challenges the belief that you must fully fix yourself before you can move forward. That belief keeps people waiting indefinitely for a version of themselves that may never arrive. Acceptance says you can begin from here, with what you have, as you are. This chapter emphasizes that accepting responsibility is different from accepting blame. Responsibility gives you power, blame keeps you trapped. When you accept responsibility for your choices without attaching guilt to your identity, you unlock the ability to choose differently next time. Acceptance teaches you to separate your actions from your identity, so mistakes become lessons instead of labels. This chapter encourages you to accept that growth is not linear. Some days you will feel clear and focused, other days confused and unmotivated, and both are part of the process. When you stop expecting constant progress, you stop feeling defeated by temporary setbacks. Acceptance also extends to other people. When you accept that you cannot control others' behavior, opinions, or understanding, you reclaim the energy you were using to explain, prove, or defend yourself. This chapter explains that peace increases the moment you release the need for external validation and approval. Acceptance does not mean lowering your standards, it means aligning your expectations with reality. From that alignment, clarity emerges. As this chapter comes to a close, it leaves you with a grounding truth. Acceptance is not the end of change, it is the beginning of it. When resistance dissolves, energy returns. When honesty replaces denial, direction becomes clear. By accepting where you are without judgment, you create the strongest possible starting point for where you are going. And from that place of calm awareness, real and lasting transformation finally becomes possible. Chapter 4. Responsibility is the moment the direction of your life quietly but decisively changes, because this is where you stop waiting for circumstances to improve and start choosing how you will respond to whatever happens. This chapter is not about blaming yourself for everything that has gone wrong. It is about reclaiming the power you unknowingly give away each time you say, "I can't because of them. I would if things were different," or "This is just how life is." Responsibility is not heavy when it is understood correctly. It is freeing because it returns control to where it belongs, within you. This chapter asks you to notice how often you explain your situation instead of changing it, how often you focus on what others did instead of what you can do next. While your past experiences, upbringing, and environment may explain your struggles, they do not have to define your future. Responsibility begins when you accept that, regardless of how you arrived here, you are the one who must decide what happens next. This chapter explores the powerful distinction between reacting and responding. Reacting is automatic, emotional, and often rooted in old patterns, while responding is intentional, thoughtful, and aligned with who you are becoming. When you take responsibility, you pause long enough to choose your response instead of letting your emotions choose for you. That pause is where growth lives. This chapter also challenges the belief that responsibility requires perfection. You will still make mistakes, hesitate, and feel uncertain, but responsibility means owning those moments without excuses or self-attack. It means saying, "I chose this, and I can choose differently," instead of, "This always happens to me." Responsibility transforms problems into projects and obstacles into decisions. It shifts your focus from complaint to solution, from helplessness to agency. This chapter explains that responsibility is deeply connected to emotional maturity. When you take responsibility for your emotions, you stop expecting others to manage them for you. You recognize that while people and situations may trigger emotions, they do not control your behavior unless you allow them to. This understanding is not about suppressing feelings, it is about directing them. Responsibility gives you the ability to feel anger without becoming destructive, disappointment without becoming bitter, and fear without becoming frozen. This chapter also addresses the subtle ways people avoid responsibility, such as overthinking instead of acting, blaming timing instead of preparation, or waiting for motivation instead of building discipline. These avoidance strategies may feel safe in the moment, but they quietly delay progress. Responsibility, by contrast, often feels uncomfortable at first because it removes excuses, but that discomfort is temporary and empowering. The chapter emphasizes that responsibility does not mean doing everything alone. Asking for help, seeking guidance, and learning from others are also responsible actions. What responsibility rejects is the belief that someone else must save you before you can move forward. This chapter invites you to step out of the role of victim and into the role of participant in your own life. It reminds you that responsibility is the bridge between intention and outcome. Without it, goals remain ideas. With it, they become plans. As you take responsibility for your time, you begin to see how small, wasted moments accumulate into years of stagnation, and how small, intentional choices accumulate into meaningful progress. Responsibility teaches you to treat your time, energy, and attention as valuable resources rather than endless supplies. This chapter concludes by reinforcing a powerful truth. The moment you fully accept responsibility is the moment your life stops feeling random. You may not control every event, but you always control your response, your effort, and your direction. And when you take ownership of those, you no longer wait for change to happen. You become the reason it does. And HTR5 emotions are not the enemy you were taught to fear. They are signals, messengers carrying information about your inner world. And this chapter exists to teach you how to listen without losing control. Many people live as if emotions must either be obeyed instantly or suppressed completely, but both extremes lead to imbalance. When you obey every emotion, your life becomes reactive and unstable. When you suppress them, they build pressure beneath the surface and eventually erupt in ways you do not recognize or intend. Emotional mastery is not about becoming cold or detached. It is about developing the awareness and discipline to feel fully, while choosing your actions consciously. This chapter invites you to notice how often a single emotion has the power to hijack your entire day, your tone, and your decisions. A moment of anger becomes a harsh word you cannot take back. A moment of fear becomes hesitation that costs you an opportunity, and a moment of sadness becomes withdrawal that deepens loneliness. Emotions move quickly, but consequences last longer, and learning to create space between the two is one of the most valuable skills you can develop. This chapter teaches you the power of the pause, that brief moment where you breathe, observe what you are feeling, and remind yourself that you are not the emotion itself. You are the one experiencing it. That distinction alone can change how you respond to pressure, conflict, and uncertainty. Emotions often feel overwhelming because they are tied to old memories, beliefs, and expectations that operate below conscious awareness. This chapter explains how past experiences train your nervous system to react before your mind has time to think, and how recognizing this process allows you to slow it down. When you understand that your emotional reactions are learned patterns, not fixed traits, you stop judging yourself for having them and start learning how to work with them. This chapter also emphasizes that naming an emotion reduces its intensity. When you can say, "I am feeling anxious," instead of "something is wrong," clarity replaces panic. Emotional literacy gives you control, not by eliminating feelings, but by understanding them. This chapter challenges the habit of blaming others for how you feel. While people and situations can trigger emotions, they do not dictate your response unless you surrender that choice. Taking responsibility for your emotional reactions does not mean ignoring hurt or injustice. It means choosing how you process and express those experiences in ways that protect your integrity and long-term goals. The chapter explores how emotional awareness strengthens relationships. When you can communicate emotions clearly instead of acting them out, conflicts become conversations instead of battles. You learn to listen without defensiveness, to speak without aggression, and to set boundaries without guilt. Emotional control also supports focus and discipline. When emotions are unmanaged, they drain energy and attention, making consistency impossible. This chapter explains how calming the emotional mind allows the rational mind to lead, especially during moments of stress or decision-making. It also addresses the misconception that strong people do not feel deeply. In reality, strength comes from the ability to experience intense emotions without being controlled by them. This chapter encourages you to allow emotions to rise and fall naturally, like waves, instead of trying to hold them in place or push them away. Suppressed emotions do not disappear. They show up as tension, fatigue, irritability, and burnout. Emotional mastery requires honesty with yourself, patience with your process, and practice in real moments, not theory alone. The chapter reminds you that you will not always respond perfectly, and that is part of growth. Each moment of awareness, even after a reaction, builds skill over time. As this chapter comes to a close, it leaves you with a grounding truth: your emotions are not problems to solve, but experiences to understand. When you learn to feel without reacting and respond without suppressing, you gain access to calm, clarity, and self-respect. From that place, your decisions become intentional, your actions align with your values, and your inner world becomes a source of strength rather than chaos. Assess Chapter 6. Discipline is often misunderstood as restriction, punishment, or force, but in truth, discipline is one of the highest forms of self-respect, and this chapter exists to reshape how you see it and how you practice it in your daily life. Discipline is not about being harsh with yourself or living without joy. It is about choosing what you want most over what you want now. It is the quiet agreement you make with your future self, the decision to show up even when motivation is absent and excuses feel convincing. Motivation is emotional and unpredictable, but discipline is steady, reliable, and loyal. This chapter asks you to notice how often you wait to feel ready before taking action, not realizing that readiness is usually the result of action, not the cause of it. Discipline bridges the gap between intention and outcome, between who you are and who you are becoming. Without discipline, goals remain ideas and dreams remain wishes, but with discipline, even small efforts compound into extraordinary results over time. This chapter emphasizes that discipline does not require massive effort. It requires consistency. A small habit done daily will always outperform a big effort done occasionally. Discipline lives in ordinary moments, the choice to begin when it would be easier to delay, the choice to stay focused when distraction offers comfort, and the choice to continue when progress feels slow and invisible. This chapter also dismantles the myth that discipline means ignoring your feelings. True discipline acknowledges resistance, fatigue, and doubt, but does not allow them to dictate behavior. You can feel unmotivated and still act. You can feel tired and still show up. Discipline teaches you that feelings are temporary, but the consequences of your actions are lasting. This chapter explains how discipline builds self-trust. Every time you keep a promise to yourself, no matter how small, you reinforce the belief that you are reliable. Over time, that belief becomes confidence. On the other hand, every broken promise weakens self-trust and creates internal doubt. Discipline is not about perfection. It is about integrity with yourself. Missing a day does not erase progress, but quitting does. This chapter encourages you to return quickly instead of restarting dramatically, because discipline grows through recovery, not punishment. The chapter also explores how discipline creates freedom. At first, discipline feels restrictive because it asks you to say no to impulses, but over time, it expands your options. When you are disciplined with your time, you gain more time. When you are disciplined with your energy, you gain more clarity. When you are disciplined with your habits, you gain more confidence. This chapter highlights that the life you admire in others is often built on discipline you do not see: early mornings, uncomfortable choices, and repeated effort without applause. Discipline is invisible in the moment, but undeniable in the results. This chapter also addresses self-sabotage, explaining that people often resist discipline because it exposes their potential. If you never fully commit, you never have to face the fear of failing at your best. Discipline removes that hiding place. It asks you to step forward fully, knowing that growth requires vulnerability and effort. The chapter reminds you that discipline must be realistic to be sustainable. Extreme routines collapse under pressure, but simple systems survive chaos. Discipline works best when it is built into your environment, your schedule, and your identity. When you stop asking, "Do I feel like it?" and start asking, "What does the person I am becoming do in this situation?" discipline becomes natural. This chapter reinforces that discipline is not something you are born with, it is something you practice. Each choice strengthens it, and each excuse weakens it. Over time, discipline becomes less about effort and more about identity. You stop negotiating with yourself because action becomes automatic. As this chapter comes to a close, it leaves you with a powerful truth. Discipline is not about controlling your life, it is about directing it. When you choose discipline, you choose progress over comfort, clarity over chaos, and self-respect over self-betrayal. And in making that choice daily, quietly, and consistently, you build a life that no longer depends on motivation to move forward. HTR 7. Focus is the rarest and most powerful resource you possess in a world designed to steal it, and this chapter exists to help you reclaim it with intention and discipline. Every notification, comparison, and interruption competes for your attention, not because it adds value to your life, but because attention has become a currency others profit from. When your focus is scattered, your energy is drained, your progress slows, and your potential remains fragmented. This chapter invites you to notice how often you are physically present, but mentally elsewhere, how often your mind jumps from one thought to another without completing what truly matters. Focus is not about doing more, it is about doing what matters deeply and consistently. When you focus, you align your time, energy, and effort toward a clear direction, and that alignment creates momentum. This chapter challenges the belief that multitasking is productive, explaining that constant switching weakens attention and increases mental fatigue. Focus thrives on simplicity. When you choose fewer priorities, you perform them better. This chapter encourages you to define what deserves your attention and to protect it as you would protect something valuable. Distraction often feels harmless, but over time it compounds into missed opportunities, half-finished goals, and quiet regret. This chapter explains that focus is not just a mental skill, it is a lifestyle choice. The environments you create, the people you listen to, and the habits you repeat either strengthen your focus or erode it. When you allow constant noise into your life, clarity becomes difficult to hear. Focus requires boundaries, and boundaries require courage. This chapter explores the discomfort of saying no to invitations, to unnecessary conversations, and to digital noise, so you can say yes to your growth. Focus also demands emotional control, because unresolved emotions pull attention away from the present moment. When your mind is cluttered with worry, resentment, or comparison, focus becomes impossible. This chapter reinforces that emotional clarity supports mental clarity. It also addresses comparison as one of the greatest threats to focus. When you measure your progress against others, you lose sight of your own path. Focus asks you to compete only with who you were yesterday. This chapter teaches you that focus is built through deliberate practice. It is strengthened when you train your attention to stay with discomfort instead of escaping it. Deep work often feels uncomfortable because it requires effort and presence. But that discomfort is a sign of growth, not a signal to stop. This chapter encourages you to develop rituals that support focus, starting your day with intention, creating periods of uninterrupted work, and ending your day with reflection. Focus improves when your goals are clear. Vague goals create scattered effort, but clear goals channel attention effectively. This chapter also reminds you that rest is part of focus. A tired mind cannot concentrate deeply, and burnout masquerades as laziness. Protecting your energy through rest, movement, and reflection strengthens your ability to focus when it matters most. Focus is not about intensity all the time, it is about rhythm. This chapter explains that when you respect your limits, your focus becomes sustainable. Over time, focused effort builds mastery, and mastery builds confidence. As this chapter comes to a close, it leaves you with a defining truth: your life moves in the direction of your focus. What you repeatedly give your attention to becomes your reality. When you reclaim your focus, you reclaim your power to choose, to create, and to grow. And in a distracted world, that ability becomes your greatest advantage. Growth often feels lonely, and this chapter exists to prepare you for that reality, while helping you understand why solitude is not a weakness, but a necessary part of transformation. When you decide to evolve beyond old habits, relationships, and patterns, not everyone will understand or support the changes you are making. Friends may feel abandoned, family may feel challenged, and colleagues may feel uncomfortable because your growth highlights the complacency or stagnation around them. This chapter teaches you that the discomfort of others is not your responsibility to fix. It is simply the natural consequence of choosing progress over comfort. Loneliness in growth is different from isolation. It is intentional, reflective, and deeply productive. This chapter encourages you to embrace periods of solitude as opportunities to strengthen your self-reliance, to deepen your understanding of your own values, and to clarify your vision for the life you want to create. True growth requires turning inward before reaching outward, because the stronger and clearer you are internally, the more aligned your external actions will become. This chapter explores the tension between connection and independence, reminding you that while support is helpful, dependency is dangerous. You cannot outsource your transformation, and the sooner you accept that, the faster you progress. Growth also demands courage to stand apart from the crowd, to hold boundaries that may make others uncomfortable, and to say no to distractions disguised as obligations or opportunities. This chapter explains that discomfort is not a sign that you are doing something wrong, but a sign that you are pushing the edges of your comfort zone, which is exactly where growth happens. Loneliness teaches you to become your own companion, to find validation from within rather than constantly seeking it externally. When you learn to enjoy your own company, reflection becomes a tool instead of a burden, and decision-making becomes clearer because it is informed by your values rather than the expectations of others. This chapter emphasizes that growth is often misunderstood as linear or dramatic, but real growth is quiet, incremental, and sometimes invisible to others. The lonely periods are where your habits, mindset, and character are being forged. This chapter encourages you to reframe solitude not as punishment, but as preparation. It is in these moments that you practice resilience, self-discipline, emotional awareness, and focus without the distractions of social noise. Loneliness also provides clarity on relationships, showing you which connections are supportive and which are limiting. It teaches you to let go of people who drain your energy or hold you back, and to nurture those who challenge and inspire your best self. This chapter further explains that periods of solitude amplify self-awareness, making it easier to recognize patterns, triggers, and limiting beliefs that might otherwise go unnoticed in constant social engagement. Solitude is the laboratory for experimenting with new behaviors, ideas, and priorities without judgment. It allows you to act, observe, and adjust, cultivating the independence and confidence necessary to sustain long-term growth. This chapter addresses the fear that being alone means being unloved or unsuccessful. On the contrary, the ability to be alone and still feel whole is a hallmark of maturity and readiness for deeper connection. Growth cannot be outsourced, and the moments spent in focused solitude are investments in the quality of your future relationships, decisions, and achievements. The chapter also reminds you that loneliness is temporary and cyclical. It ebbs and flows with your commitment to your path. The discomfort fades as your inner strength increases, and the world eventually aligns with the person you are becoming. Finally, this chapter leaves you with a critical truth: the lonelier the journey, the richer the destination. When you embrace the quiet, do the work unseen, and honor the solitude necessary for reflection and alignment, you develop resilience, clarity, and independence. The isolation of growth is not emptiness, it is preparation. It is where you build the inner foundation strong enough to carry the weight of your ambitions, the vision for your life, and the discipline required to turn potential into reality. Solitude is not something to fear. It is the silent teacher of the person you are becoming, and when you learn to walk through it with patience, courage, and awareness, you emerge not only stronger, but fully ready to create, contribute, and connect from a place of authenticity and power. Tr 9 SARS. Failure is not a stop sign, and this chapter exists to teach you that failure is feedback, a guidepost, and often the most honest teacher you will ever encounter on your journey. Too many people fear failure as if it defines them, as if a single setback erases years of effort and potential. But failure is not a verdict on your worth. It is a mirror reflecting what is working, what is not, and where adjustment is needed. This chapter asks you to see failure as a natural and necessary part of growth, not as a permanent mark of incompetence. Every successful person has failed repeatedly, but what separates those who succeed from those who give up is the ability to learn from failure without being consumed by it. Failure tests patience, resilience, and perspective. It exposes weaknesses, gaps in knowledge, and untested assumptions, and in that exposure lies opportunity. This chapter emphasizes that failure becomes transformative only when you refuse to interpret it as shame, excuse, or justification for inaction. Instead, you must examine it objectively, asking, "What can I learn?" rather than, "Who am I because of this?" The chapter also explores how failure teaches humility and emotional strength. When things do not go as planned, your ego wants to protect itself by rationalizing, blaming, or denying. But growth requires a willingness to face discomfort with curiosity instead of resistance. This chapter encourages you to take ownership of your mistakes without identifying with them, understanding that your identity is separate from your outcomes. Failure also clarifies priorities and exposes what truly matters. When a project, relationship, or effort fails, you are given a rare opportunity to examine why you invested energy, time, and emotion into it, and whether it aligns with your goals and values. The chapter underscores that failure is a compass pointing toward adjustment, not a dead end. Resilience is built through repeated encounters with failure. Each time you rise after a setback, you train your mind and body to recover more quickly, think more clearly, and act more intentionally. This chapter emphasizes that resilience is not innate. It is cultivated through practice, reflection, and persistence. Failure also teaches strategy. When you fail, you receive concrete data that theoretical plans cannot provide. Patterns emerge from mistakes, showing what works, what does not, and how to improve. This chapter explains that ignoring failure is far more costly than failing intentionally, because unexamined failure repeats itself silently, draining confidence and momentum. The chapter also addresses fear of judgment, which often compounds the pain of failure. People worry about what others will think, about the embarrassment of mistakes, and about perceived incompetence, but external opinions are rarely accurate reflections of your value or potential. Failure is personal, but it is rarely public in the way your mind dramatizes it. This chapter encourages you to separate the private lesson from the imagined judgment, focusing on improvement rather than validation. Failure teaches patience as well, because growth is rarely immediate. When a plan fails, you are reminded that mastery takes time, experimentation, and repeated effort. Impatience leads to shortcuts and repeated mistakes, while patience allows the lessons of failure to sink in and transform future action. This chapter also explores failure in the emotional and relational spheres. Disappointments with others, misunderstandings, and conflicts are all forms of failure that teach you about boundaries, communication, and empathy. These experiences provide insight into yourself and your expectations, helping you navigate relationships with more wisdom and clarity. Failure is never final unless you make it so. This chapter leaves you with a critical mindset shift. The moment you decide to learn, adjust, and continue, failure becomes a stepping stone rather than a stumbling block. It becomes a source of information, a driver of innovation, and a teacher of resilience. As this chapter concludes, it reinforces the truth that success is not the absence of failure, but the accumulation of lessons learned from it, applied consistently, and acted upon with courage. The failures you experience today, when examined honestly and responded to intentionally, are the very tools that build the foundation for your future achievements. In this way, failure is not your enemy, it is your ally, your instructor, and the hidden pathway to growth that only those willing to face it, reflect on it, and rise again can ever fully appreciate. Ahas Aptr 10. Letting go is one of the most difficult yet liberating acts you can perform, and this chapter exists to guide you through understanding why release is essential for growth and fulfillment. Many people cling to the past, old identities, outdated beliefs, failed attempts, toxic relationships, and goals that no longer align with their true purpose, because letting go feels like loss, uncertainty, or even betrayal of who they once were. But holding on to what no longer serves you only weighs you down, draining your energy, clouding your clarity, and preventing you from fully stepping into the life you are capable of creating. This chapter teaches that letting go is not giving up, it is making space for what is next, for what aligns with your values, passions, and potential. Letting go begins with awareness, recognizing what you are holding on to and why. Sometimes we hold on out of fear, comfort, guilt, or obligation, and identifying the true reason is the first step toward freedom. This chapter emphasizes that release requires courage, because the familiar, even when harmful, often feels safer than the unknown. It asks you to face the discomfort of uncertainty and to trust that your growth will continue once the burden is lifted. Letting go is both internal and external. Internally, it involves releasing limiting beliefs, self-critical thoughts, and emotional attachments that no longer support your well-being. Externally, it can involve ending toxic relationships, stepping away from unproductive environments, and saying no to commitments that consume your energy without adding value. This chapter explains that the process of letting go is gradual and requires patience, because attachments are often layered and deeply ingrained. There will be moments of resistance, nostalgia, or fear of emptiness, and this is normal. The key is to act intentionally, moment by moment, with the understanding that each release brings clarity, lightness, and opportunity. Letting go also creates space for creativity, focus, and purpose. When you carry less weight, your energy can flow toward what truly matters. Old grudges, failed plans, or regretful memories act like anchors that hold you in place. Once released, you can move forward freely and with direction. This chapter also addresses the emotional challenge of letting go, particularly the pain associated with loss or change. Accepting that endings are part of life allows you to honor what was valuable without allowing it to control your present or future. Emotional release is not denial, it is acknowledgement followed by choice. Letting go is an act of self-respect because it prioritizes your well-being and your potential over comfort or obligation. This chapter reinforces that clinging does not prevent change, it delays it. By letting go, you accelerate your growth and invite new experiences that align with who you are becoming. The chapter also teaches discernment, the ability to differentiate between what is worth holding and what is worth releasing. Not every challenge, relationship, or memory should be abandoned. The skill lies in identifying which attachments empower you and which ones limit you. Letting go requires reflection and honesty, asking yourself, does this serve my growth, my peace, and my purpose, or does it drain and distract me? This question becomes a compass for decision making and personal alignment. Letting go also involves forgiving, not necessarily for others, but for yourself. Many people cling to guilt, shame, or regret, but forgiveness allows you to release the emotional weight that keeps you tethered to the past. This chapter emphasizes that forgiveness and letting go are intertwined, creating space for emotional freedom and renewed energy. Additionally, letting go requires courage to embrace uncertainty. When you release the old, you step into the unknown, and that unknown holds the potential for growth, opportunity, and transformation. This chapter teaches you to welcome uncertainty as a natural and necessary part of progress rather than a threat. Finally, letting go is a practice, not a one-time event. You will continually encounter situations, thoughts, and feelings that require release, and each act of letting go strengthens your ability to live intentionally and fully. As this chapter concludes, it leaves you with a vital truth. The moment you release what no longer serves you, you open the door to clarity, purpose, and freedom. Letting go is not about loss, it is about creating space for growth, alignment, and the life you are truly meant to live. It is in this release that your energy, focus, and potential converge to shape a future unburdened by the past and fully available to the possibilities ahead. CCSTR 11.1 says consistency is the hidden force behind all meaningful achievement, and this chapter exists to help you understand why showing up every day in small and deliberate ways outweighs occasional bursts of intensity or motivation. Many people misunderstand success as a product of dramatic actions, overnight breakthroughs, or rare moments of inspiration, but the truth is that lasting transformation is built quietly, invisibly, and relentlessly through repeated effort over time. Consistency is not glamorous, and it rarely feels urgent, but it compounds, layer by layer, until results appear in ways that surprise and even astonish you. This chapter asks you to notice how often you start with energy and enthusiasm, only to fade when progress is slow, challenges arise, or distractions appear. Momentum is not created by one perfect day, one brilliant idea, or one burst of willpower. It is created by showing up when it is inconvenient, when it is tedious, and when no one is watching. Consistency transforms ordinary habits into extraordinary outcomes, and it transforms self-doubt into confidence, because every small act of follow-through proves to yourself that you are reliable, disciplined, and capable. This chapter emphasizes that consistency is not about perfection, it is about persistence. You will miss days, falter in your routines, and encounter setbacks, and that is part of the process. What matters is your ability to return, adjust, and continue, rather than giving up entirely. Each repeated effort builds a foundation that becomes stronger and more stable over time, and every day you maintain your commitment, you reinforce a sense of identity aligned with your goals and values. Consistency also strengthens focus and clarity. When you act regularly toward a purpose, your mind begins to recognize patterns, anticipate challenges, and develop solutions automatically. Over time, your actions feel less like forced effort and more like natural alignment with your intentions. This chapter teaches that consistency is closely tied to discipline, but it adds the element of reliability over time. Discipline is the spark that gets you started. Consistency is the engine that keeps you moving forward. Together, they turn potential into tangible progress. This chapter also addresses the challenge of monotony, because consistent effort often feels repetitive and boring. But it is precisely in the repetition that skills are honed, habits are strengthened, and mastery begins to emerge. The discomfort of routine is temporary, the results of consistency are lasting. Consistency is also a test of resilience and patience. In a world that celebrates instant gratification, those who maintain steady effort often feel invisible or overlooked at first. This chapter encourages you to trust the process, understanding that impact accumulates quietly until it becomes undeniable. Consistency requires alignment with purpose. When your daily actions are connected to meaningful goals, even small efforts carry significance, and even slow progress becomes motivation to continue. Without purpose, consistent effort feels empty, mechanical, and draining. This chapter reinforces that growth is rarely linear. You may not see immediate results, and the visible outcome may lag behind the effort, but the invisible change, the strengthening of character, habits, and mindset, occurs in real time, silently preparing you for future breakthroughs. Consistency also fosters self-trust, because each completed task, each kept promise, and each maintained routine reinforces the belief that you can depend on yourself. Self-trust becomes the foundation for confidence, resilience, and greater achievement. This chapter explains that accountability is a key partner to consistency. Whether through external support, personal tracking, or reflection, monitoring progress helps you maintain momentum and correct course when necessary. At its core, consistency is an act of faith in the unseen. It requires believing that the effort invested today, though it may not yield immediate recognition, is building toward something greater tomorrow. This chapter also teaches that consistent action influences every area of life, relationships, health, career, and personal development, because repeated, intentional choices shape identity, habits, and results across the board. As this chapter concludes, it leaves you with a profound truth. Consistency is the bridge between dreams and reality. Motivation will fluctuate, inspiration will wane, and obstacles will appear, but the person who shows up every day, even imperfectly, becomes unstoppable. Success is not created in moments of brilliance alone. It is forged through the quiet, relentless, and intentional accumulation of effort, proving that the simplest principle, practiced faithfully over time, has the power to transform your life completely. At 12 hours, confidence is not something you are born with, and it is not a gift that falls into your lap. It is a skill, a mindset, and a practice that must be built intentionally over time. And this chapter exists to show you how to cultivate it in a way that is authentic, sustainable, and unshakable. Many people mistake confidence for arrogance, loudness, or constant assurance, but true confidence is quiet, steady, and rooted in competence, self-awareness, and trust in your own abilities. It begins with self-trust, the belief that you can handle challenges, learn from mistakes, and take responsibility for your actions. This chapter emphasizes that confidence grows when your actions consistently match your intentions and your words, creating a feedback loop of reliability and self-respect. Every promise you keep to yourself, no matter how small, strengthens the foundation of your confidence. Conversely, every broken commitment, delayed decision, or avoidance weakens it and creates internal doubt. This chapter explores the connection between competence and confidence, highlighting that confidence is not wishful thinking. It is proven through experience. When you take action, make decisions, and face challenges, you gather evidence of your capability. Over time, this evidence replaces fear and hesitation with certainty and clarity. Confidence also involves managing your inner dialogue, because the stories you tell yourself shape the reality you perceive. Self-critical, negative, or anxious thoughts erode belief in your abilities, while self-encouraging, realistic, and empowered thoughts reinforce it. This chapter teaches you to notice the difference between humility and self-doubt, understanding that humility acknowledges growth areas without undermining your overall competence. Whereas self-doubt paralyzes action and diminishes your potential, confidence requires embracing discomfort, because growth, learning, and achievement rarely occur within the boundaries of safety and certainty. Each time you step into uncertainty, take responsibility, or face a fear, your confidence increases, not because success is guaranteed, but because courage and action build resilience, self-trust, and competence. This chapter explains that confidence is also relational. It is strengthened through authentic engagement with others, where you practice communication, assertiveness, and accountability. Confidence is not the absence of mistakes or failures. It is the ability to handle them gracefully and continue forward despite them. Fear of judgment often undermines confidence, and this chapter addresses the importance of separating self-worth from external approval. True confidence is internal. It is not dependent on applause, validation, or comparison. When you stop seeking permission from others to believe in yourself, you reclaim your power and focus on what truly matters. Confidence grows from repeated practice of key behaviors: showing up, speaking up, taking initiative, keeping commitments, and reflecting on lessons learned. This chapter emphasizes that confidence is cumulative. It develops gradually through small, consistent actions rather than sudden breakthroughs. Each successful experience, every resolved challenge, and each thoughtful decision reinforces your belief in your capacity to navigate life. Moreover, confidence is flexible and adaptive. It allows you to remain composed in uncertainty, resilient in setbacks, and humble in victories. This chapter encourages you to shift your perspective from needing to feel confident before acting to acting in ways that build confidence. In other words, you cultivate confidence through practice, not waiting for it to appear magically. The chapter also addresses the role of preparation, knowledge, and skill in reinforcing confidence. Confidence built on competence and experience is unshakable, while confidence built on assumptions, luck, or comparison is fragile and temporary. This chapter challenges the myth that confident people never feel fear or doubt. In reality, they feel it, acknowledge it, and act despite it. This ability to act with awareness and intentionality is what separates genuine confidence from illusion or pretense. Confidence is also intertwined with integrity, because when your actions align with your values, beliefs, and commitments, you reinforce self-respect and internal certainty. Acting contrary to your principles erodes confidence faster than any external criticism could. Finally, this chapter leaves you with a transformative truth. Confidence is not the absence of challenge, failure, or discomfort. It is the ability to move forward in spite of them, guided by self-trust, competence, and authenticity. When you build confidence intentionally, consistently, and ethically, it becomes a foundation upon which every goal, relationship, and ambition can rest securely, empowering you to navigate life with clarity, courage, and unwavering belief in your own potential. Shia 13. Purpose is often misunderstood as a distant destination, a singular calling, or a life-altering revelation. But this chapter exists to teach you that purpose is discovered through action, refined through experience, and clarified through consistent reflection, and it is revealed most clearly when you commit to doing, learning, and growing rather than waiting for insight to magically appear. Many people delay meaningful work, thinking they must first find their purpose before moving forward. But the truth is that purpose is not a static thing to be located. It is a living, evolving direction that emerges as you take deliberate steps, test your limits, and engage fully with life. This chapter emphasizes that action is the engine of clarity. The more you try, experiment, and participate, the more you learn what energizes you, what aligns with your values, and what drains your energy or leads you astray. Purpose is not revealed in comfort zones or in passive observation. It is forged in the crucible of effort, challenge, and reflection. This chapter asks you to notice the difference between passion and purpose. Passion may spark excitement temporarily, but purpose sustains you over the long journey, especially through setbacks, resistance, and uncertainty. Purpose emerges when your skills, values, and interests intersect with actions that create impact, and that intersection is rarely apparent without testing it in real-world conditions. This chapter also explores how purpose is strengthened through alignment between your internal compass, your values, beliefs, and passions, and your external actions. When your behavior reflects what you genuinely care about, you feel coherence, motivation, and resilience. When it does not, you feel drift, frustration, and fatigue. Purpose is clarified when you consistently ask questions like, does this action move me toward meaningful outcomes? And, is this aligned with who I am becoming? These questions filter out distractions, habitual reactions, and obligations that do not serve your long-term vision. This chapter emphasizes that purpose requires courage, because stepping into action often involves risk, uncertainty, and discomfort. It asks you to move forward even when the path is unclear, trusting that engagement will reveal clarity over time. Purpose also develops through perseverance. You may experience failure, rejection, or stagnation, but each challenge contains feedback about what works, what does not, and what needs adjustment. This chapter teaches that setbacks are not signs that you are off course. They are data that refine your direction, deepen your understanding, and strengthen your commitment. Purpose is relational as well as personal. The work you do, the value you provide to others, and the impact you create in your community all contribute to the clarity and fulfillment of purpose. This chapter encourages you to consider how your talents, resources, and experiences can intersect with opportunities to make a meaningful difference, without waiting for permission, recognition, or ideal conditions. Purpose also grows through reflection, journaling, and self-assessment, because introspection allows you to notice patterns, identify what energizes you, and correct course when needed. Without reflection, action can become aimless, busywork, or reactive, and true purpose remains hidden beneath noise and distraction. This chapter challenges the notion that purpose must be dramatic or world-changing. Often, it is subtle, practical, and deeply consistent with who you are. Purpose is less about the size of your impact, and more about the alignment and intentionality behind it. This chapter reinforces that purpose is revealed incrementally, through repeated choices, consistent effort, and careful attention to what matters most. It grows as you move from one experience to the next, carrying lessons forward, adjusting, and refining your approach based on feedback from life and from those affected by your actions. Purpose also requires letting go of expectations imposed by others or by outdated versions of yourself. When you release the need to conform to outside standards, you make room for authenticity, clarity, and sustained motivation. This chapter emphasizes that purpose is active, not passive. It is not enough to think deeply, plan meticulously, or hope for inspiration. You must act consistently, learn from results, and adjust your direction intentionally. Finally, this chapter leaves you with a transformative truth. Purpose is not a fixed point in the distance, but a path revealed through deliberate action, reflection, and alignment with your values. When you commit to moving forward, experimenting, learning, and refining, purpose emerges naturally, providing clarity, resilience, and meaning. It is through consistent, intentional engagement with life that you discover not only what your purpose is, but also the confidence, fulfillment, and momentum to live it fully each day. Awajab Sechaptar 14 Das momentum is the invisible force that determines whether your efforts lead to lasting results or fizzle out into frustration. And this chapter exists to teach you how to create, sustain, and harness momentum in every area of your life. Momentum begins with action, because movement generates energy, confidence, and clarity, while stagnation breeds doubt, hesitation, and overwhelm. Many people wait for the perfect moment to start, not realizing that the act of beginning is what produces momentum, not readiness or external conditions. This chapter emphasizes that even small, consistent actions create cumulative effects, gradually building the speed and power necessary to overcome inertia and achieve meaningful goals. Momentum is fragile at first. It can be disrupted by distraction, doubt, or lack of follow-through, but once established, it becomes self-reinforcing, amplifying effort and creating results that feel almost effortless over time. This chapter teaches that momentum is not about rushing or forcing outcomes. It is about creating a rhythm of consistent, aligned action that compounds gradually. Momentum thrives on clarity because when your direction is precise, your energy flows efficiently toward what matters most, minimizing wasted effort and maximizing progress. This chapter explores the role of focus in sustaining momentum. Dispersed attention, frequent multitasking, and constant evaluation drain energy and halt forward motion, whereas concentrated effort in one direction creates acceleration and builds confidence, making subsequent actions easier and more natural. Momentum also relies on emotional energy. Motivation fluctuates, but momentum allows you to move even when enthusiasm is low, because the forward motion itself generates motivation. Each completed task, no matter how small, reinforces the belief that progress is possible and creates a positive feedback loop that encourages further action. This chapter emphasizes the danger of stopping once momentum begins, because the hardest part is often simply continuing. When you maintain movement through discomfort, doubt, or fatigue, you reinforce self-trust and resilience, proving to yourself that you can rely on your commitment even when circumstances are challenging. Momentum is amplified by preparation, planning, and the careful sequencing of tasks. By structuring your actions strategically, you ensure that each step naturally leads to the next, reducing friction and increasing the likelihood that energy will build instead of dissipate. This chapter teaches that momentum is not a constant state. It naturally ebbs and flows, and understanding these cycles allows you to conserve energy during low periods and maximize output during high periods. Recognizing the patterns of your own energy and focus helps you work with momentum rather than against it. Momentum also interacts with accountability. Sharing progress with others, tracking results, or setting measurable milestones reinforces forward motion, because external markers create commitment and reduce the likelihood of drift or procrastination. This chapter addresses common obstacles to momentum, such as perfectionism, overthinking, fear, and comparison. Each of these acts like an anchor, slowing progress and creating unnecessary friction. Momentum requires the willingness to act without knowing every detail, to adjust on the go, and to embrace uncertainty as part of the journey. Momentum compounds over time. Small actions repeated consistently generate results that at first feel invisible, but eventually reach a tipping point where progress accelerates rapidly. This chapter emphasizes patience and persistence, because the initial stages of momentum often require effort without immediate reward, and giving up too early is the most common cause of stalled growth. Momentum also reinforces identity and self-perception. Each step taken, each challenge overcome, and each habit maintained strengthens the belief that you are capable, resilient, and aligned with your goals, making future action easier and more confident. This chapter encourages you to cultivate an environment that supports momentum, including reducing distractions, surrounding yourself with supportive influences, and creating routines that facilitate consistent action. Momentum thrives when external conditions are managed to sustain energy and focus. The chapter concludes with a vital principle: momentum is not just about movement, it is about direction, alignment, and the accumulation of consistent effort. When you begin, continue, and build intelligently, momentum becomes a force that propels you forward, reduces resistance, and transforms ordinary effort into extraordinary results. The ability to generate and maintain momentum separates those who achieve lasting change from those who falter, and mastering it allows you to move through life with greater speed, efficiency, and confidence, turning your intentions into tangible outcomes and your goals into reality. Chapter 15 Profess Reflection is the final and perhaps most powerful tool in the process of transformation, and this chapter exists to teach you how to pause, evaluate, and integrate everything you have learned, experienced, and accomplished so that your growth becomes lasting, intentional, and aligned with your highest purpose. Reflection is not merely thinking about the past. It is an active, disciplined practice of observing your actions, choices, emotions, and results with honesty, clarity, and without judgment. Many people rush from one task to another, one goal to another, without ever taking the time to assess what is working, what is not, and what needs adjustment. But this lack of reflection leads to repeated mistakes, wasted effort, and unfulfilled potential. This chapter emphasizes that reflection creates awareness, which is the foundation of all meaningful change. Without understanding why things happened, why you reacted the way you did, and what patterns are influencing your behavior, progress becomes haphazard and often temporary. Reflection allows you to recognize patterns in your successes and failures, your strengths and weaknesses, your triggers and your triumphs, providing a roadmap for more effective action in the future. This chapter teaches that reflection requires both honesty and compassion, because you must confront areas where you fell short without falling into shame, blame, or self-criticism, while also acknowledging the courage, effort, and growth that you have achieved. It is a delicate balance that allows you to learn from mistakes without allowing them to define you. Reflection is also a process of integration, connecting past experiences with current actions and future goals. When you reflect consistently, you begin to see how small choices accumulate into outcomes, how habits reinforce identity, and how repeated decisions shape the trajectory of your life. This chapter emphasizes that reflection transforms experience into wisdom, because it converts raw events into insight, understanding, and actionable knowledge. Through reflection, you develop clarity about what truly matters, which allows you to prioritize more effectively, eliminate distractions, and align your energy with your most meaningful objectives. This chapter encourages the use of journaling, meditation, or structured review as tools to facilitate reflection, because writing, speaking, or visualizing your thoughts allows you to externalize them, see them objectively, and draw conclusions that might otherwise remain hidden in mental clutter. Reflection also deepens self-awareness by helping you identify emotional triggers, habitual responses, and unconscious patterns that influence your behavior, allowing you to make more deliberate, intentional choices rather than reacting automatically. This chapter explores the idea that reflection is a practice of perspective. It enables you to step back, view situations from multiple angles, and recognize lessons that were invisible in the midst of action or emotion. Perspective allows you to detach from immediate outcomes and see the broader context of your growth, which builds resilience, patience, and strategic thinking. Reflection also strengthens decision-making because it encourages you to evaluate past actions, consider alternative approaches, and learn from experience before committing to the next step. This chapter teaches that reflection is iterative. It is not a one-time activity, but a continuous cycle of assessment, learning, adjustment, and application. Each reflection session enhances your ability to respond effectively in the future and accelerates the development of skills, habits, and mindset necessary for success. Reflection fosters gratitude as well, by helping you recognize progress, appreciate lessons learned, and acknowledge the support, opportunities, and resources that contributed to your journey. Gratitude reinforces motivation, perspective, and emotional balance, making reflection not only analytical but also restorative and inspiring. This chapter emphasizes that reflection is most powerful when paired with action. Insights gained without application are wasted, while action without reflection is blind. The two together create a feedback loop in which awareness informs behavior, and behavior generates new experiences to reflect upon, creating continuous growth and refinement. Reflection also cultivates humility, because it reminds you that learning is ongoing, that mistakes are inevitable, and that wisdom comes from integrating experience, rather than claiming perfection. This chapter encourages you to set aside regular time for reflection, treating it as a non-negotiable element of growth, because without it, even hard work and disciplined action may lack direction, focus, and sustainability. Finally, reflection anchors all the lessons from previous chapters: awareness, acceptance, responsibility, emotional mastery, discipline, focus, growth, failure, letting go, consistency, confidence, purpose, and momentum, into a coherent framework that guides future choices. As this chapter concludes, it leaves you with a transformative truth. Reflection is the bridge between experience and mastery, between intention and results, and between effort and fulfillment. By making reflection a habitual and intentional part of your life, you transform every action into learning, every setback into insight, and every success into wisdom, ensuring that the life you build is not only productive, but also deeply meaningful, aligned, and sustainable.